Hi. So good to see all of you. And it's so cool to be here at Bishop's Lodge, because 10 years ago I was here, and it was here that I prototyped, we're gonna get this right. We're gonna do it. There we go. It was here that I prototyped my leadership development work with horses. And I had this ragtag team of string horses that were totally exhausted from taking tourists up and down the hill, but very, very willing. So it's great to be here, and thank you, Angelica, for this opportunity, and Jean. Yeah. Will you join me in acknowledging the traditional indigenous custodians on whose ancestral homelands that we gather tonight? The Tsuki people, the Tewa people, and the ancestors past, present, and future that enable us to be here at this time. And the water, and the land, and the plants, and the trees, and the animals. Thank you. So, while I get organized here, we're gonna start our time together tonight with a little bit of an exploration and a little bit of an inquiry. So if you all would mind to close your eyes for me. And just settle into someplace comfortable in your body. And maybe even take a longer exhale than inhale. That just sends a parasympathetic volley to your brain that there's no saber-toothed tiger out there. And take yourself to a place where you feel a sense of connection and belonging, a sense of safety and ease. Maybe it's with a beloved, or a place in nature, or with a pet, a dog or a cat. Or maybe it's just an internal place that you know. And many of you have had glimmers of this kind of space. Maybe you've had more than glimmers. Maybe you've created entire lifestyles and careers around this place. And imagine that while you're here, you realize that almost everything that we've been taught about how to live and how to love and how to lead and how to be successful just isn't true. That, in fact, these things we've been taught are largely unhelpful and unsupportive. And imagine that you realize that you are wired to be in this place, to live from this place, that it's your birthright, and that it's natural. And if you knew that this place of ease and peace and connection was natural and was your birthright, what narratives would you want to create for yourself? What is true if so much of what we've been taught is not true? And what might be possible for you? And just as importantly, where would you go to find out what is true? You can open your eyes, thank you. So when I was just 7 years old, I had an experience of belonging and connection and safety. But I was way too young to understand, what it was and why I was having it and what it was about. But it did set my life on a trajectory where I couldn't all the way 100% buy into the consensus reality of who I was supposed to be as a little girl, and what I was supposed to value and what was important. I spent the better part of my adulthood searching for answers to, well, what is true, and what does it mean to be human, and what are we supposed to live for, and how do we live from this place of belonging? My father ran the Laboratory of Anthropology here just around the corner and up the hill in the 1960s. And so I had a very unconventional childhood. I ran around on archaeological digs, mostly unchaperoned, on sacred sites in indigenous communities around the world, but mostly here in northern New Mexico. And it was there that I had so much of my education. When I was 7 years old, my father brought my family and me to Ethiopia to be on a dig with him. And it was there that I met Kabata. And Kabata was an Oromo warrior. And the Oromo people are the indigenous people of Ethiopia. And my father hired Kabata because he felt like in the 1970s, 2 blonde kids were a kidnapping target, but also he hired Kabata to protect us from the baboons. And the book starts with my encounter with Kabata, and it was with Kabata that I had this experience of connection and belonging and unconditional love. Kabata walked with long, graceful strides behind my father, dwarfing my father's 6'4" frame. A white blanket slung elegantly over his right shoulder made him look like an emperor. A single dangling earring accentuated his jawline, his chin held high, his shoulders back. His wide feet met the earth with the snugness of belonging. In one hand was a spear, in the other a small metal lunchbox. My father hired Kabata, an Oromo warrior, to guard my brother and me at all times. Apparently 2 American children playing in the African bush were a kidnapping target in the local growing unrest. "It's for the baboons," Dad said, noticing me staring at Kabata's spear. He swept his arm along the landscape, indicating their probable whereabouts. "He will wedge the base into the sand like this," he said, gesturing how the spear would be secured to the earth, angled towards the attacker. "And the sharp point will lodge into its chest when it pounces," my father completed. He completed the horrible pantomime with his hands, with a hand arcing toward its death by finger point. I, of course, was not so worried about myself as the poor, unsuspecting baboon, simply wanting his dinner. The Oromo are one of the indigenous peoples of East Africa, the largest ethnic group in Ethiopia. As is the fate of so many of the world's traditional peoples, the Oromo were and continue to be among the most persecuted during Ethiopia's political struggles. They suffered severely during the 2 recent famines that claimed millions of lives, most of them Oromo. Today, thousands of Oromo are kept in secret concentration camps and jails just for being Oromo. Kabata watched over my brother and me with complete concern, as if we were the most important things on earth. He was gentle with kind, quiet eyes. He stood by as we played in the dust of the excavation sites, propped up against his spear, a silent sentinel, while archaeologists crouched busily nearby. At night as we slept, he stood alert outside our door under the porch light, moths flying around his head in zigzagging spirals. In time, I convinced him that protection was just part of his job description. The rest was to play with me. Obligingly, he swung me around in circles and tossed me in the air. He drank tea alongside my teddy bear. He chased goats on my imaginary horse ranch. I grew warmly accustomed to Kabata, though not a single word was spoken between us, and I blended myself into the daily colorful, laughter-infused clamor that was Oromo life. Weeks later, we were set to depart on our tiny motel home. The sun had not yet risen, and Kabata was still in his place by my door, moths flying around the exposed bulb hanging above his head. Only now he was sitting in a rusted metal chair, slumped over listlessly. Around him was much activity as the team loaded up the gear to go. Kabata sat stone still. Not able to comprehend the situation, I jumped happily up on his lap and squeezed him around the neck. I thought he would laugh in his usual way, but instead he pulled me in and held me tightly, his long arms wrapping completely around my small frame, his chest rising and falling falteringly against mine. He held me at length without a sound. I pulled away slightly to look at his face. Tears ran down his cheeks, tiny rivulets streaming through the dust. It was the first time I had seen a man cry. Then I realized I might never see Kabata again. I curled back into the safe harbor of his embrace and began to melt into the tender exchange between us that was happening without words, a conversation between the ancient world and the new about care and responsibility. In that moment, we met across a chasm of time, language, race, and familial ties, and without the slightest trace of separation or thought, merged into a state of unconditional love. At some point in a person's life, if we are lucky, we might have such an uncommon opportunity when the curtains of mental constructs part and we behold something precious, sacred, and true. Sometimes it can happen at the bedside of a dying loved one, or while listening to a piece of music or in nature. Other, truer dimensions briefly penetrate through and leave us forever changed. Those weeks amongst the Oromo and that early morning experience with Kabata under the porch light forever changed me. They created an indelible internal compass setting toward unconditional love that would both inform and haunt me. It embedded an unmistakable calling, which I was compelled to follow for the rest of my life. My guess is that you feel called too, to something. And I'd bet that somewhere in your life, some event set your inner compass to that calling, whether you were aware of it or not. This book is for the called. It is for the thought leaders, visionaries, professionals, parents, creatives, and all those who care. It is for you who have seen or sensed another way, and those of you who feel you are being asked to participate in humanity's flying lead change through the way you live and lead. For these are times that require not just social change in the traditional sense, but something magnificent, a civilizational sleight of hand, an artful change afoot mid-stride, and a miraculous act of physics-defying thrust into the unknown. What was revealed to me in Ethiopia can be best described by one word: connection. Connection to oneself, to another, to existence. Do you remember a gentler time in the world when every person was supported with such an intrinsic wholeness? Neither do I. And yet we yearn for it as if we were exiles from a beloved homeland. So the book is really shaped around that experience and that inquiry. What are we called to, and how do we want to live, and where do we go to find out what's true? And it draws on many of the experiences that I had as a child and at my very unconventional education, and to help us find answers. So besides my experiences with Kabata and other indigenous teachers that I've had, I was also a kid that just loved being in nature. And so Mother Nature taught me a lot. I'm sure Mother Nature taught you all a lot, or you probably wouldn't even be in this room. And what she shows is that there is a different possibility for us, that it doesn't have to be this hard. We don't have to be this stressed. We don't have to be this afraid. And there is a different way. So I basically took these three influences and brought them together, these ancient influences, which represent 60,000 years of indigenous wisdom and 3.8 billion years of nature's evolutionary intelligence, and then 56 million years of nature's emissary, the horse. And I sort of bring it all together with, substantiate it with evidence-based research of paleontology, anthropology, neurobiology, and what is the other one? Some of those, archaeology. And so that way people have a kind of more rational framework to learn about these more subtle things, and to learn how to apply these principles in today's world during these times, because we really are at a civilizational crossroads. That's no secret to all of us in this room that we are facing unprecedented change and unprecedented challenges right now, economically, environmentally, socially. In just hanging out with some of the statistics recently and prepping for this talk, I just recently read, for example, that the #1 cause of death to American children is now firearms. Yeah. And the #1 cause of death to new American mothers is suicide. And that our children under the age of 14 are taking their lives at an unprecedented rate. So we've never been here before. And mothers, our mothers are perishing, our children are perishing. They represent the canaries in the societal coal mine. And our mother is perishing. So was it Einstein who so famously said, you can't solve today's problems with the kind of thinking that got you into these problems. And so we need to start thinking differently and looking at different narratives and different ways to think. And there is a huge, these times have been prophecy for a very long time across many different traditions around the world, that humanity would be at a choice point, a civilizational choice point, and that we would be at a place where we would have to choose between fear and love. We could no longer just kind of hang out between the two. And we have allies. We have human allies. We have people who are doing amazing work to help people live from a higher consciousness. The work of Joan Borisenko, for example, is just amazing. The work of Toby Herzlich and her biomimicry. These are important voices that are making a huge difference in the world. And I also feel we need to listen to ancient voices who've come long before us, and the non-human voices who are older than us. Humans, 6 million, I think, and depending on how you slice it, and nature 3.8 billion, and horses 56 million. So these voices have a lot to tell us, and they have a lot to teach us. And you might ask, why horses? Like, why not bees and deer or dogs or cats? And horses figure large in this book, but as a teacher, not as a sentimental sort of companion, but as a teacher. So there's a reason why we work with horses when we learn about different ways to do things, and that is because, many reasons, they're one of the oldest, most successful mammals on the planet. The oldest is the platypus at 150 million. The horse comes in second at 56 million. So the horse has been through tectonic shifts and climate spikes and volcanic mega explosions and comets and pandemics, and they're still thriving today. And they're thriving because of how they lead, and because of the values they uphold, and because of their culture. And a lot's been written about how to make a horse jump higher and run faster, because we tend to see horses as a commodity. But according to indigenous tradition, the horse is a wisdom teacher. And so they have much to teach us. So their culture is centered on 5 core principles: You could call them principles, you could call them values. And those are safety, connection, peace, freedom, and joy. Safety, connection, peace, freedom, and joy. And the lead horse is appointed because of her ability to keep those 5 principles intact. And she does it not through dominance, not through force, not through manipulation, not because she's the biggest. She does it through care and presence. It's a power with paradigm of leadership. Hollywood presents another picture. It's not true. It's a power with, it's a partnership paradigm of leadership as opposed to a dominance paradigm of leadership. It's or power over. So imagine if we governed our institutions on upholding principles of safety, connection, peace, freedom, and joy, how our world might be different. And imagine if we elected and selected our leaders based on their ability to uphold safety, connection, peace, freedom, and joy through their care and presence instead of their manipulation, their prowess, their wealth, their charisma, which has nothing to do with leadership at all. Not according to a 56-million-year-old system, it doesn't. So the horse figures, he's ubiquitous around the world as a wisdom companion. And in my experience, they are here to teach. They're happy if you ride them and win ribbons with them, but why they're really here is for this time to teach us, to choose love over fear. And they teach through modeling to us, through reflecting back to us who we are, what gifts we bring, what might not be working for us, and through actual instruction that happens. One of my favorite chapters in the book is about what my alpha mare Artemis did in the face of a coup. And see if anything about this scenario sounds familiar to you. An enormous red-brown Lusitano, that's a Portuguese bullfighting horse. His name is Brio, stomped mightily off the trailer onto the driveway and surveyed his new home with large, bright eyes. A long swath of mane draped over one side of his face, almost to his flaring nostrils. With a loud and emphatic snort, he announced his arrival to our herd, who by now had all lined up excitedly along the north side of their paddock, with 6 sets of ears pricked sharply forward. Introducing a new horse to the herd is never an easy task. In most cases, it's fraught with drama, screams, kicks, and bites as everyone negotiates the new terms. It can last anywhere from hours to months, and my gregarious and highly opinionated herd members usually have lots to discuss when there is a change. I led Brio to his holding pen, a separate but attached area where he could meet and get to know the others without clashing. Brio had lived among stallions, that's uncastrated males, for much of his life. Seldom, if ever, did he encounter, up close anyway, mares. Mares are females. This is akin to a young man being raised motherless in a community of Hell's Angels. Lacking the usual discipline and cultural refinement that most mares teach, Brio had not a single clue how to behave with mares or with a multigendered herd. This became utterly apparent when a week later we released Brio into the paddock with the others for his debut. Like Godzilla, he took over the city. Not once did he pause to check to see the established order or learn who belonged where. Naturally peaceful and conflict averse, the horses complied, but they were not loyal to this new insurgent. Though Brio crowned himself king, does he remind you of anybody? He spent his days alone in one quarter of the paddock while the others huddled together in the other. And where was Artemis in all this? She did not fight him. She simply, quietly, yet deliberately gave way, because Artemis had another plan. I learned much about power in those weeks. I learned how misuse of power creates compliance, but does not create respect or loyalty. I learned that horses generally will not resort to violence even when abused, and that even in nature, abuses of power can happen. When it does, it costs everyone, including the abuser. But the most masterful teaching about power came from Artemis. As lead mare, her role required her to sustain safety, connection, peace, freedom, and joy through her care and presence. She was not wired to suddenly depart from her intrinsic nature as a leader and duke it out with the usurper. What an interesting conundrum Brio presented for Artemis. How to maintain those qualities in the face of a coup? Would she take up arms with the gnashing of teeth and hurling of hooves? But that would be counter to her leadership fidelity. And besides, Brio had easily 700 pounds on her. At first it appears as if Artemis did nothing. I feared she had resigned herself to the new status quo and that the herd would be sad and depressed forever. But I had underestimated her. In fact, she was leveraging one of the most potent elements of physics, time. And time allowed Artemis one of the most overlooked but powerful strategies of enlightened leadership, persistence. While most of us in modern life have grown to rely on speed and efficiency to get things done, we do so at significant cost. What would we do with a Brio in our midst? Many of us would acquiesce, some of us would complain, others would plot his arrest, but few would stand in such emboldened dignity as Artemis. True to the conservation of energy that true leadership and living requires, Artemis saw no need for running around burning calories to take control of things. She let time do the work and used her presence to change the power dynamic. Yep, just like the old proverbial water on a stone, we're talking glacial. The field of safety, connection, peace that she projected gently bent the others toward her leadership. What evolved over weeks that became months was a subtle yet clear shift of power. It was more like a ripening than a dramatic reclamation, more a gentle unfurling than a grand sweep. And then one morning when I went out to feed, I saw Brio quickly move away from Artemis in reaction to the faintest curl of her lip in his direction. I smiled to myself. She was back, and with her the equilibrium of the entire herd. Her persistence wore him out, little by little, her tiny requests, her subtle refusals, and the inertia of the other horses' positive responses to her nuanced leadership style won over his might. And what became of dear Brio? Well, true leadership serves the whole, and that includes Brio. He learned a lot from the expert mentoring and modeling of Artemis. He found his right use of power, and with that he became friends with the others. He even landed his own unique role in the herd as the protector of the underdogs, in this case, our donkey Cassie, and our partly blind mare, Blue. So I'd love to open the floor to any questions or comments. Take a few minutes. Anything anybody wants to share or ask, the floor is yours. Yeah, Toby.
Kelly, it's so great to see you reading this and to hear it in your voice. Thank you. I'm wondering if you can share with the group the title and what it means, flying lead change. What does that mean and why is it relevant?
What the heck is this?
Right?
Why flying lead change? Thanks, Tobes. So flying lead change is an equestrian term. And I use it as a metaphor. And what a flying lead change is I'll describe it this way. Four-legged animals seldom run, well, they don't run in a straight line, not ever, not really. They're always arcing a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. When they arc, and you can watch your dogs or your cats run, when they arc, their balance shifts, and so they have to support the slight lean in their body by extending out their hind and front leg. So in horse terms, when a horse is running at his fastest gait and his front right leg is leading, it's called being on a right lead, and it's how they balance. When the topography changes and they have to change balance, then they have to do this physics-defying maneuver where they bounce off of the ground, and in midair, and we're talking, anywhere between 500 and 1,800 pounds, they fly through midair and they switch the legs so that they're on a new lead. They go from right to left or from left to right. So I use this as a metaphor because what we're really looking for is that humanity take an evolutionary bounce forward. That's different than just changing. That means you have to do something that's physics defying. Isn't it, Toby, isn't it right? Like octopus will like hack and lose, like they'll lose things. Animals will lose gills, and wouldn't that be called a bounce forward from an evolutionary point of view? So we're talking a radical change. And also because we're looking at right to left, we've been in this power over paradigm, this dominance paradigm for so many hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years, we've forgotten that there's a power with. And we need to make a shift from one side of our brain to another side of our brain. And I'm not saying that the other is the best, but we need to be able to be on both sides of our brain, both sides of our society, masculine, feminine. There's all kinds of ways to play with that metaphor. So that's what's behind that. Yeah. And now, at work, people will say, I'm having a flying lead change. And they know that they've had an evolutionary bounce forward and everything has changed. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
How do you feel like the younger generation seems to be shifting? I heard recently said that old people need to find a young person to mentor them because it's so different that we need to be listening to them as much as we think that they need to be listening to us.
Yeah, I totally agree. On my team, I have a bunch of Gen Zs on my team, and I'm learning so much. And there's mentoring both ways. So again, just to play with that metaphor of a right and left lead, let's learn from the young people and let them learn from us too. I'm also seeing an enormous amount of wisdom in young people today, at least the young people that just astonishes me, that people are talking about things at 20 and 22 that I didn't even think about till I was 48 or whatever, right? So they do have a lot to teach us, and what I love about indigenous societies is how much the elder is also so revered, appreciated, loved, and respected. And in our modern society, that isn't always the case. People are just shipped away and tucked over there.
Okay, boomer.
Yeah, you had it.
Well, I just read your book and it's wonderful.
Thank you.
And I have several questions, of course, but first one I'm going to ask is, have you ever imagined your way into the skin of a horse so that you can imagine yourself in the skin of the horse, looking through the eyes, hearing through the ears, sensing, walking down a Santa Fe street near the plaza, and people are passing you, and passing buildings. What would it be like to be inside the skin of the horse, experiencing that?
That's so beautiful. That's a great question. So there's actually a really beautiful ritual that is available to go through where you become a horse. It's done through drumming, and as a kid, I was a horse all the time. I was the horse. I was not the cowboy or cowgirl. The actual skin of a horse, from my point of view, this is my point of view, is very porous. They're feeling everything all the time. And that's one of the things that they teach us, because humans are like, oh, this is a bad feeling, this is a good feeling, I shouldn't be feeling this, I should be feeling that, happiness is better than grief, all this business. For the horse, it's all just weather patterns that move through it, and all of it gives information, and they have to know that information because they're animals of prey. And if they miss a signal, they become lunch. And a predator, if he misses a signal, he may miss lunch, but he doesn't become lunch. So the sensitivity of every whisker, every hair, every eyelash, every piece of hair on the mane, it all is a sensory organ. And so I imagine if we were human and we jumped into a horse body, it'd be very overwhelming at first. But then can you imagine like feeling so much all the time, what that might be like? And at the same time, all that gravity on the earth, all that weight, all that sure-footedness, those 4 feet. And so a lot of the work that we do is around helping people to get embodied again, to feel everything, to feel their feet on the earth, to be in their body in the way that the horse invites us to be. So, thank you. But that's just my perspective. I'll read a little more and then I'll open the floor again. So a lot of the book centers on this topic of belonging. This particular chapter kind of brings in the neuroscience of belonging, the physics of belonging, why it's so important, why we're hardwired for belonging, and why things are so kind of strange now in our modern culture. But it also brings in a very precious person to me, Uncle Bob Randall, who was one of my most significant teachers in my life. He is the listed custodial elder of Uluru, which is the big red rock in Australia. And he just really taught me how to be in relation to nature and myself and others in a way that I had never been taught before. So he's in this part too. Belonging is not so much an achievement as it is a birthright. But absent a culture that is informed by belonging, we are born into exile and shapeshift ourselves to belong to something or someone. A disconnected society seeks to return home in myriad dysfunctional ways: perfectionism, materialism, codependency, and addiction, just to name a few. But until we find the root of the disconnect, the legacy of exile will continue. In the 1950s, an American psychologist named Harry Harlow created a series of controversial experiments which later would shape the narrative of our sense of connection. Curious about the biological underpinnings of belonging, he investigated its origins, the mother-infant bond. Harlow departed from his era's widely supported view that babies were only attached to their mothers for the purpose of receiving physical nourishment. To prove this, he separated several infant rhesus monkeys away from their mothers and raised them in a laboratory setting. Without their mothers, the monkeys showed disturbed behavior, staring blankly, circling their cages, and self-mutilating. Harlow then designed his famous wire mother monkey experiment. The motherless infant monkeys were given 2 surrogate mothers made out of wood frame wire. One wire mother was covered in soft terry cloth, mimicking a mother's soft fur, thus comforting the baby with touch, but had no milk attached to it, and the other wire mother was simply wire, no cloth, but had a bottle of milk. Harlow found that the infant monkeys spent significantly more time with the soft, milkless mother than they did with the wiry, milk-providing mother. The babies came to the wire mother only to feed and immediately returned to cling to and be soothed by the cloth surrogate to satisfy their need for touch and comfort over hunger. When forced to choose, they chose to starve so that they could receive touch. These studies produce groundbreaking empirical evidence for the primacy of parent-child attachment, relationship, and the importance of parental touch and affectional nurturing to our development. But this is where it gets interesting. Secure attachment through parental bonding not only assists in optimal development, it informs our existential sense of our connection to the whole throughout our lives. The degree that attachment was interrupted in our infancy directly corresponds to our sense of exile as adults. Belonging begins in the womb, where our natural network, first formed in elegant circuitry informed not only by our DNA, but by our womb environment. Was our mother happy and safe? Were her circumstances supportive? The moment of birth and the next few years are just as formative. Were our primary caregivers physically affectionate and close, or acutely distracted by addiction and other stressors? Was our discipline violent or nonviolent? These questions reflect a simple binary that cuts the wheat from the chaff. choices, actions, and environments that either create secure attached functioning or not. The public is not comfortable asking these questions. Our upbringing creates adults who perpetuate the same culture that harmed us when we were children. "Hey, I was spanked and I'm fine," is a common response. Regardless of our opinions and parenting styles, the science is sound. Warm, loving, and consistent arms powerfully shape a society towards well-being and felt belonging. Sadly, contemporary lifestyles weaken secure attachment. Modern children experience far more time alone than in the arms of their parents. Add to it technology creep, and we have a perfect storm. A society must radically support its parents through enlightened parental policy and offer new narratives about what babies and children actually need, so that parents are encouraged to securely attach to their children. In turn, this will help us forge bonded communities. Psychologist and author Robert Wolfe describes his time spent in Malaysia among the elusive Sangoi, a handful of Aboriginal people of the Malay jungle. These people make up a society of benevolence, connection, and unconditional love. Like many tribal societies, their infants are carried, cradled, touched, and held, not just by their parents, but by their entire community. "The plants, the animals, the rocks, the trees, they miss us," said Uncle Bob, as we walked together in the Wollumbin rainforest in Australia, a few months after our first encounter in 2008. He spoke at length about his kinship to the natural world. "That rock over there," he said, pointing to a large boulder, "he's family. I belong to him, and he belongs to me." Uncle Bob and I spoke at length about belonging, especially since it was the topic of my book for which I first interviewed him. While privilege severs childhood attachment in my society, colonization severed it in his, and historically in millions of traditional families around the world. Stealing babies and children from the arms of their mothers to be raised in missions was the colonist solution to the land rights and what they deemed the native problem. And today we in the West continue to steal children from the arms of migrant mothers and fathers as a solution to the migrant problem. In 2019, the United States took away an unprecedented 69,550 migrant children from their parents. Enough infants, toddlers, and kids to overflow an average-sized NFL stadium. That's more children detained away from their parents than any other country, according to the United Nations. Governments steal children purposefully as to destabilize and erode a population. It's kind of a slow genocide. Having been stolen as a young boy, it took Uncle Bob decades to awaken from the trauma and brainwashing of disconnection to find his way back to belonging. When he did find it, he became an advocate for all of us to find ours. As an Aboriginal person, you know that you belong to so much more than your human family. You belong to the land and all the living creatures on it. You belong to creation as creation and to anything that is living, and it belongs to you. It's the livingness, the beingness that connects us. That livingness is what we share and what is the same in all of us, he said. This livingness is what makes us family, he continued. We are one, from the most minute tiny grain of sand to the largest mountain, every reptile, bird, animal, insect, rock, and tree. Even the clouds and the rivers are our family. Some people don't understand this issue of belonging. They don't know how to feel it or recognize it. To them I say, and to you he says, start with the feeling of feeling the living things around you that know they belong to you. Those of you who have animal friends like cats or dogs or horses, those animals will show belonging to you. They know you are family. You can feel it when they come to you with that recognition in their eyes. Uncle Bob was not talking about belonging in terms of ownership, of course, but rather belonging in the togetherness of connection. Now extend that feeling to every other thing, including the trees, he said. They don't have the same response as an animal because they're in one spot, but they've got that same energy of belonging to you. Move out from there. The rocks, the water, the sand, they have it too. When I look at a rock, it's not just a rock. It's my connection to all of creation. It's only my misguided thinking that lessens our belonging, our being part of what is. The thought that we are not connected with all things makes us fragile. In other words, we need not need to effort to try and create connection. All we need to do is open up to the belonging that is already here. So we have a few more minutes for a few more questions, or comments, or sharings.
I have a comment.
Yes.
I do traveling exhibits, science museums, history museums. I traveled a Sherlock Holmes murder mystery exhibit to science museums and history museums. It was a very difficult exhibit to solve. We had a detective from Scotland Yard go through it twice to figure it out. It was a completely different story. I traveled with for 9 years, saw a lot of school kids go through. We found, to our surprise, that integrated or multiracial kids from multiracial schools did better solving it than homeschool kids or private school kids. They would congregate invariably. The leadership seemed to be girls. There was, there was shoving and laughter and everything, but they were good at solving it. They contributed all together and made a little team. And they would travel through the exhibit picking out clues. There are a lot of clues, but you had to put it together. Why do you think that's?
It's such a great story, and there's a bazillion whys, but just off the top of my head, interracial communities, we're wired to connect. We're not wired to be separate. And when you do things in alignment with the natural way that we are meant to live, then it increases the intelligence as well. So, like, I passed over a couple of the paragraphs, but this group, the Sangoi, who were carried and loved by the whole community, they actually could solve math problems better. They could solve puzzle problems better. They were far more sensitive. They were far more attuned to different changes in musical notes. So they would measure different sensitivities. So when we do what's natural, then we all fare better. When we separate and pull things apart and close things off, then we only become more stupid, really.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great story. Anybody else? We have a couple more minutes. Yes. It's Eric, right?
It is.
Yes, hi.
I guess on a personal level, one of your first responses, you talked about shifting and integrating all parts of the brain. And maybe we're supposed to do that emotionally as well. So for you, while you were writing this book, was there a part, whether it was a topic or character, that brought up emotions for you, that surprised you?
Well, sorry, just the phone got my ear.
I'm so
Was
sorry.
there? That's fine. Was there
While you were writing, was there a part of the book while you were writing, whether it was a specific topic or a character or time frame that brought up, surprised you with certain emotions that came up?
The whole process of writing this book was an emotional process, and for me, when I experience emotion, it's when I'm most authentic. Emotions to me just represent a way that I'm touching into something that has the most meaning for me. And anytime I wrote about Uncle Bob, I mean, I could barely just talk about him without crying now. And it's not a sentimental emotion it's because he touched something in me that's true. And he lifted a veil that was not serving me and that was keeping me scared and small. And for that, I'll be forever grateful. And when I talk about Kabata, the same thing happens. So I like to open the door to emotions for myself and for others, because I feel like we get to access so much more parts of ourselves through that, even if they're uncomfortable feelings. And I'm curious, what is behind that question around emotion for you in your own life?
there's things that obviously won't come to the surface. So
Mhm.
having not read your book yet, I was curious.
Yeah.
There were these, parts of it that struck you
Yeah.
more than you knew would. So
Yes,
thank you.
yeah. And what strikes me is they still do, even though I've read the book easily 500 times. Yeah. One more person, yeah, hi, Victor.
At this point, given all your experience, what's the most challenging aspect of learning and teaching with her?
The most challenging aspect is staying out of the way. They have so much, they are so smart and so right on. And it amazes me. You know this, have you ever seen this cartoon with Gary Larson where the cows are hanging out like smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee? You know which cartoon I'm talking about? And they're all like on the hill and they're drinking the smoking cigarettes and drinking the coffee, and then one cow goes, "Car!" And all the cows go down on four legs again. And the car goes by. And my life is like that every day because I'm like, my conditioning is to keep seeing them as horses, even though I've seen, but my conditioning is still there. And I just have to always like hang out with the ones smoking the cigarettes and drinking the coffee, because that's where the magic happens. And I'm humbled by how often I still see them as the ones on four legs. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah, so I think we're wrapping up, right? We started 15 minutes late, but now.
Yeah, it's okay. You can go a little longer if you want.
One more question? Yeah, Barbara.
So I just want to say, what's really great about this book is that nowadays, I'm in education too, and there's studies that show that, especially millennials, that if you want to impart anything on them, and heavens forbid you try, if you just drone on, but if you give them an opportunity to also think about what you said and help them implement or execute whatever it is that you're learning. So in this case, you have a chapter, and then at the end, she kind of forces you, because she prompts you to, what does this mean for you? And you're like, well, I'm not ready for that.
Thank you.
But you learn.
Yes.
And you take it with you. So we all learn from the millennials,
Yeah.
TikTok and YouTube and all that. So this has been great. It's been very compelling. So
Thank you. At the end of every chapter is always some journal questions and then exercises to do so that you can bring it in to your own life. Yeah. One more and then that'll be it.
Will there be a test after this?
Yes, it's at the back of the book. You have to buy the book and then take the test.
For the rest of your life.
So I invite you to come visit our campus. We're just 7 minutes up the road, up 592 towards Rio Medio. We're not far. We have 11 acres, a very gregarious herd, and if you go to my website, you'll see my essays and courses and classes and just lots of ways to play and splash around in this space. There's some bookmarks on the table that have our website, and you can check out things from there. And pick up the phone and call. And just keep doing your part. Keep doing your part. Like Artemis, it doesn't have to be fast. It doesn't have to be instant. Just keep being persistent by doing your part of being part of the power with paradigm rather than the power over paradigm. No matter how much you feel like doing power over, stick with the power with. Yeah, thank you, everybody.